Well, sometimes you think you are nothing. Sometimes you think you have nothing. And what you think doesn't matter if God is with you. I invite you to turn in your copy of God's Word to the book of Exodus as we continue our series, Questions. What is God asking you? Last week we considered God asking Jacob, what is your name? And Jacob had to admit who he had become so that God who could make him into who he needed to be. And we saw how God changed Jacob's name from Jacob to Israel. Now as we come to the book of Exodus, several centuries have passed and a lot has happened in the history of Jacob's descendants. Jacob ended up having 12 sons. And the next to the youngest of those sons is Joseph. And he is his father's favorite. And that causes his older 10 brothers to despise Joseph. And through a series of events, the brothers sell Joseph into slavery. And in the providence of God, however, that what they meant for evil, God uses for good. And he raises Joseph to be second in command of all of Egypt, the main power of the world. Well, a famine causes Joseph's brothers to travel to Egypt to get food, and Joseph eventually relocates the entire family to the fertile land of Goshen in Egypt. And Genesis ends with everyone in Goshen. And things are great for a century or so. But then a new king to whom Joseph meant nothing came to power, and fearful at the number of Israelites and the fact that they could, if they wanted to, join forces and rebel and overthrow his kingdom, he puts the Israelites in slavery and oppresses them with harsh labor. Pharaoh even makes a law that any Hebrew boy that is born must be killed. And it's during this time of this edict that a young boy, who's eventually named Moses, is born. Through the providence of God, Moses' life is spared. He's even raised by Pharaoh's own daughter. But Moses knows that he is a Hebrew, and when he becomes a man, he can't stand how his people are treated. In fact, one day, when he's around 40 years old, he sees an Egyptian beating one of his Hebrew brothers. And in anger, Moses kills the Egyptian, hides the body in the sand, but Pharaoh finds out about it. And Pharaoh tries to kill Moses. Moses is able to flee. He flees to the land of Midian, where he spends the next 40 years as a shepherd. Meanwhile, the Hebrews are still in slavery in Egypt, but God has not forgotten them. In fact, in Exodus chapter 3, Moses is tending his flocks when he sees something unusual. There is a bush that is on fire, but it's not burning up. And when Moses goes to check it out, God speaks to him from the bush, and he calls Moses to go back to Pharaoh, go to Egypt, and to lead the people out of slavery. Well, Moses is uncertain about this call, and he asks God 3 questions. Maybe out of humility, maybe out of insecurity, maybe out of a little bit of both. After all, it's been 40 years since these people have seen Moses. He was 40 when he left. He's 80 now. The elders of Israel, when he was a young man, are now probably all dead. The young men are now the elders, and the kids are now the young adults. So Moses' first question to God is, who am I that I should go to these people? In fact, we read about that in chapter 3, verse 11 and 12. Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? And God said, I will be with you. And this will be the sign to you that it is I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain. Moses asked, who am I? And if you'll notice, God doesn't even answer his question. He just says, I'll be with you. And you'll know that I've sent you when you get right back here and you worship me. So basically, God replies to Moses' question, who are you? Well, no one really, Moses. But that doesn't matter because you have me. You are whomever I make you to be. What Moses thinks of himself, what others think of Moses is irrelevant. What matters is that God is with him. Therefore, Moses' second question is, okay, so who are you? Look at verse 13 of chapter 3. Moses said to God, suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? Then what shall I tell them? And God said to Moses, I am who I am. This is what you are to say to the Israelites, I am has sent me to you. God, if people ask me your name, what am I to say? God's answer, my name is I am. I am who you need. I am what you need, whenever and wherever you need it. So Moses' first question dealt with himself. His second question dealt with God. His third question deals with everybody else. And that's where we come to our text for today. Moses' question number 3 is, well, what if they don't believe me? Look at chapter 4, verse 1. Moses answered, what if they do not believe me or listen to me and say, the Lord did not appear to you? What if they don't believe me, God? I mean, it seems like a fair question to me. Why should they? Moses has been gone for 40 years. These people don't know him, and if they knew him, they don't know him anymore. And he's supposed to just wander back into Egypt after being 40 years in the desert and in Midian tending sheep, and he's supposed to just walk in and say, hey, guys. Hey, by the way, I'm Moses. Used to live here, grew up in the palace. Life was spared. Whole long story. Pretty cool thing. But here's the thing. I ran away because I killed an Egyptian. But don't forget all that. The thing is, I'm back. And you see, guys, the other day, God appeared to me in a burning bush. And he spoke to me. And he said, Moses, go lead the people out of Egypt. And so I'm here, guys. So come on. I mean, you can imagine how crazy that sounds. I mean, I imagine those people saying, some dude's working on his bricks, you know, and he's like, nah, man, I'm going to just keep making my bricks right here. You just go on with yourself, you crazy sucker. Some other guy's like, Shepherd, what are you going to do to the Egyptians? If you don't realize something, they're the most powerful force on earth, and we're their slaves. I mean, what are you going to do? Sing Mary Had a Little Lamb to them or something? You need to go and just go back to your flocks. Leave us alone. I mean, I can understand Moses' insecurities. He had genuine concerns, but there's something God had told him earlier that he'd already forgotten. Look back at chapter 3, verse 18. Notice what God says. The elders of Israel will listen to you. God had already told Moses that the elders of Israel would listen to him. God had the unique ability to see the end from the beginning. And so he says, look, Moses, they're going to believe you. But Moses says, yeah, God, but what if they don't? And in asking that question, Moses is denying God. He's really saying God is a liar. And I suppose God could have just smacked Moses silly right there and moved on, maybe found somebody else, but he doesn't, because that's not how God works. God knows we are unbelieving at times, and we are hard-headed a lot of the time. And so, God, in His grace, never deals with Moses' denial. Instead, He answers Moses' question with a question of His own. That's verse 2. Then the Lord said to him, "What is that in your hand?" "A staff," Moses said. Now, staffs were important in ancient culture, especially for shepherds, but not only for shepherds, because a staff was an essential personal possession because it identified who you were and it served as a way of protection. Many staffs were specially carved, so they were unique and they represented the person who carried them. So in some ways, they were like our passports or driver's license today. You could show your staff, or somebody could see your staff and say, yeah, that belongs to so-and-so. But also, the staffs were a means of protection. And so in that way, they were kind of like carrying an open carry sidearm. Today, it says, don't mess with me, I'm ready. Well, so Moses' staff had been both of these things. For 40 years, I'm sure he had used that staff as a shepherd, and that staff was well worn from all that shepherd herding. Moses had used that staff probably to steady himself as he walked trails and as he walked up mountainsides. He had used that staff to fight off wild beasts that threatened him and his sheep. He had used that staff to guide his sheep where they needed to go. And so God says, Moses, what's that in your hand? And what this? But it's a staff. God gives Moses 3 signs that are going to help him believe and the others believe. Let's look at the first one in verses 3 and following. The Lord said, throw it on the ground. Moses threw the staff on the ground. It became a snake, and he ran from it. And then the Lord said to him, reach out your hand and take it by the tail. So Moses reached out and took hold of the snake, and it turned back into a staff in his hand. This, said the Lord, is so that they may believe that the Lord, the God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, has appeared to you. The first of these 3 signs that God is going to give Moses involves the staff itself, and God commands Moses to throw the staff on the ground, and the staff becomes a snake. And of course, Moses jumps back, as you and I would have, if something we had just held in our hand became a snake. I would be running and never look back, and this conversation would be ended. So, it becomes a snake. He runs away, but then God says, pick it up by the tail. Now, those of you who grew up in the country dealing with snakes know you don't grab a snake by the tail. You try to control the head, because if you grab that snake by the tail, it can come around and bite you. But God says grab it by the tail, and Moses, who just ran away, grabs it, which indicates some faith, maybe. But also the original language indicates that he snatched it up quickly is kind of the idea. So I kind of think, my dad was a country boy, and a couple of times when I was growing up, I watched him grab a snake by the tail. But it wasn't to pick up and pet the snake. He would go after the snake, and he'd grab it, and he'd pop it. And he'd pop the head off. Any of y'all ever do that? Y'all 7 times as crazy, just like my daddy was. But impressive. Impressive to see that. So maybe, I'm just thinking Moses grew up in the country. Or he spent the last 40 years in the country. Didn't grow up in the country, grew up in the city. He spends 40 years in the country. He learned to deal with snakes. So maybe he thought he's going to just grab it up quickly and do something with it. And then as soon as he touches it, it becomes a staff again. And then God says, do that if they don't believe you. And then he gives him another sign in verses 6 and 8. Then the Lord said, put your hand inside your cloak. So Moses put his hand into his cloak, and when he took it out, it was leprous like snow. Now, put it back into your cloak, he said. So Moses put his hand back into his cloak, and when he took it out, it was restored, like the rest of his flesh. Then the Lord said, if they do not believe you or pay attention to the first miraculous sign, they may believe the second. But if they don't believe these 2 signs or listen to you, take some water from the Nile and pour it on the dry ground, and the water you take from the river will become blood on the ground. So the second sign is, hey, Moses, do this with your hand. The first sign had to do with what was in his hand. The second sign has to do with his hand itself. He says, look, dude, do this. Put your hand in your cloak. Pull it out. Leprous. Now, stick it back in. Pull it out. Healed. Try that. And then he gives him a third sign. Take some water from the Nile, pour it out on the ground, it'll become blood. Now, he can't perform that sign right there to show Moses that it will work because they're not by the Nile. But that will become the first of the 10 plagues that God uses in leading the people out of Egypt. Now, each sign was as much for Moses as it was for the people that he feared would not believe him, because God uses the word believe 4 times in 5 verses. And he's emphasizing Moses' lack of belief and his fear of the people's unbelief. And each sign shows Moses that he's no reason not to believe because God will be with him. But Moses still has his doubts. He still has his fears. He still has his insecurities. And so look at verse 10. Moses said to the Lord, "Oh Lord, I've never been eloquent, neither in the past nor since you have spoken to your servant. I am slow of speech and tongue." Now, scholars for centuries have speculated as to what Moses means, what his problem was. Some have said maybe he had some kind of speech impediment, like a stutter. Others have said that maybe the 40 years in the country had messed up his sophisticated speech he'd learned back in Egypt. Whatever his hang-up was, or whatever his handicap was, it was just an excuse. Because you see, our excuses to God are irrelevant and irreverent. God's reply to Moses is a question akin to his earlier one in verse 2. He says in verse 11, Moses, "Who gave man his mouth? Who makes him deaf or mute? Who gives him sight or makes him blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go. I will help you speak and will teach you what to say." But Moses said, "Oh Lord, please send someone else to do it." Moses says, "Oh Lord, I can't do this. I can't talk." And God says, "Man, who gave you your mouth?" Isn't that great? I love it. It's like, who opens and closes your mouth? I do, man. Who causes your tongue to be able to speak? I do. Man, if I say you will speak, you will speak. I can overcome impediments and insecurities. Some of you may know my friend Kenny Moore. Kenny is a pastor and a chaplain in our area, and Kenny also happens to have cerebral palsy. I love Kenny because he's such an inspiration, because he goes about all that ministry even though he has what many might consider some kind of a handicap or impediment. But you know what? Kenny's a servant of the Lord. And if you ever have an opportunity to hear Kenny pray, you better get ready. Because when Kenny prays, it's like God pulls up a chair and he says, "What you want to talk about, friend?" It is a special, special moment. Why? Because God overcomes anything that we think could hold us back. Your impediment or insecurity does not matter. If God calls you, He will overcome it. Likewise, since God made you, He will use the way He made you and the gifts and abilities He's given you to accomplish the task He has for you. God created you for a purpose. And when you answer His call, you find that purpose. But Moses, he won't let God overcome his impediment or his insecurity. He won't let God use his gifts. He says, "Oh, Lord, please send somebody else." My Old Testament professor at seminary said that statement in Hebrew is nearly unintelligible. We got to clean it up in English. It's like Moses just mumbled to himself, "Oh, Lord, send somebody else." He doesn't want to do this. He doesn't think he can. "Lord, please send someone else." But hang on a minute. Moses calls God Lord while refusing to obey Him. Hang on a second. The word Lord means master, boss. You don't use Lord in just respectful conversation, like you would Mr. or Mrs. or ma'am or sir. Lord is a title of submission. When you call somebody Lord, you mean you are submitting to them. You're humbling yourself before them. You're going to obey them. But Moses is just being polite. He's not intending on submitting. He says, "Please send somebody else." But here's the thing. If you don't obey the Lord, He is not your Lord. There's that old statement that's become kind of cliche now, that if God isn't Lord of all, He isn't Lord at all. Well, What is God's response to Moses? Verse 14, then the Lord's anger burned against Moses. And he said, what about your brother Aaron the Levite? I know he can speak well. He's already on his way to meet you, and his heart will be glad when he sees you. You shall speak to him and put words in his mouth. I will help both of you speak and will teach you what to do. He will speak to the people for you, and it will be as if he were your mouth and as if you were God to him. Verse 14 is the first time in the Bible where God is said to be angry with an individual person. And notice, he's not angry with a reprobate going off into sin. He's angry with a servant of his who's been equipped for a task that God has called him to do, who just simply won't do it. God is angry with Moses because Moses just doesn't get it. God had to be thinking, what part of I am with you are you not getting? You asked, who am I? Moses, you are a nobody, but I am with you. Well then, who are you? I am who you need. I can give you what you need whenever and wherever you need it. May I refer you to the first response to your question where I said, I am with you. But God, what if they don't believe me? Moses, what's that in your hand? Oh, yes, a staff that, oh, yes, I've already provided for you. May I refer you to the answer I gave you to the first question of I am with you. But my speech, oh, Moses, I'm so sorry. I completely forgot. You can't talk good, right? And so you've got a country hick talk or maybe you stutter. I forgot all about that, man. I am so sorry. Let me see what I can do. Oh, I know what I can do. By the way, Aaron's already on his way to help you. And he speaks well. And he can stand for you if you need him to. And I can tell you what needs to be said, and you can tell him what needs to be said, and he can say it. I've already provided for you because, well, you know, the answer to my first question was, I am with you. Now, thankfully, God is not that smart aleck. But I have to think that sometimes he would like to be. God knows us better than we know ourselves. So if he calls us to do something, we've got to trust him. We've got to obey him. When God says, I am, it is foolish for us to say, well, I am not. Because he's with us. Moses' problem was that he kept looking at himself instead of looking at God. But when you have God, you don't need to look at yourself. You don't need to look at what you have or you don't have, because you already have everything you need. You have the great I am with you. Now, verse 17. But take this staff in your hand, so you can perform miraculous signs with it. I love it. It's like God says, hey, Moses, don't forget your staff. And there's going to be some pretty cool things you're going to do with it too. In verse 20 then, Moses goes. Skip down there. So Moses took his wife and sons, put them on a donkey, and started back to Egypt. And he took the staff of God in his hand. Interesting. Did you note that? It's no longer a staff. It's no longer my staff. It is the staff of God. The insecure has been transformed to the confident, not because of who he is, but because of who God is. Because God loves to use the ordinary to do the extraordinary. He always does. Never underestimate what God wants to do through you at any stage of your life. You are never too young or too old to be used by God. When he calls, answer. Sure, you'll have questions, just as Moses did. And God will remind you of his presence with you, just as he did to Moses. He'll help you gain confidence. But there comes a time when the questioning has to end and you just have to go. And so Moses does. You might look at him as he's walking towards Egypt and ask him, hey, Moses, what's that in your hand? And he says, this is the staff of God. Now, at this point, Moses has no idea the miracles that he's going to be able to perform with God's help through that staff. I mean, that staff is going to usher in plagues on Egypt. That staff is going to part the Red Sea. That staff is going to bring water from a rock. That staff is going to be held over a battle, and the Israelites are going to be victorious. It's amazing what a staff can do in the hands of someone who is in God's hands. Can I ask you today, what's in your hand? For at least 40 years, Moses had carried around in his hand the very thing he needed to do what God was going to call him to do. So what's in your hand? It may be your gifting, it may be a resource, it may be a skill, it may be a talent. What do you have that God wants to use for His purposes in and through your life? You see, often the thing that you've had all along is the thing God has given you to use for the call He has for you. A skill, your voice, your energy, your passions. God always equips people for the jobs that He calls them to, sometimes long before He ever calls them to do it. When God called me to ministry, He said in my spirit, Dry Creek Baptist Camp, summer before my senior year of high school. I'm sitting there in the room, I'm praying about whatever's going on this week, and God said in my spirit, look, I have made you good at a lot of stuff, but not really good at anything. And that's on purpose. Because as a pastor, you need to be a generalist. You're going to have to speak, you're going to have to organize, you're going to have to love people, you're going to have to minister to them, you're going to have to be creative, you're going to have to do all these things. And I've given you this skill set because of your calling. Some people are really good at some stuff. You're not really good at anything. You're just pretty good at a lot of stuff. And that's on purpose. It was my own, hey, Stuart, what's that in your hand moment? For God to say, here's why. You know, one of the greatest needs in Christianity today is for people to answer God's call. And for some, that is to surrender their life to a ministry calling, as I did years ago. For some, though, that call is going to be to full-time service in a church or a ministry or as a missionary. Others, it's going to be to a call for bivocational or co-vocational kind of ministry, where you work in one career, but then you also minister in another. You realize that any given moment, 20% of our Southern Baptist churches are without pastors? Now, 20% sounds high, but let me show you this. If you take the whole Southern Baptist Convention, that means 9,400 churches are without a pastor this Sunday morning. 9,400. That means in Louisiana, 320 churches are without a pastor this Sunday morning. We need men to answer the call to pastoral ministry, some as their career, some as a second career, others as a complementary career. But you know, those numbers don't even count all the other positions that churches are needing today. Youth and children and music, things that used to be done by college students and others, they're not there, or they're not answering the call. And churches have these needs all over, and we need men and women to answer the call of God to serve these churches. But likewise, there are still 3,000 unreached, unengaged people groups all over the world. That means that 3,000 people groups all over the world have no active church planted among them, have no outreach underway to share the gospel with them. 3,000 people groups. We need people to answer God's call to go and reach those people, as well as the multitudes of people in places where we already have ministries going on. But also, at this very moment, right here in central Louisiana, there are 49,412 people who say they have no faith or no affiliation. Do a survey, you call them up on the phone. No, they don't give you, oh, I'm a Christian, or I'm a Baptist, or I'm a Catholic, and just they never hadn't been to church in 40 years. No, they will tell you, I have no faith. I'm not affiliated with anybody. 49,412 people. They need Jesus. We all need to answer the call to go across the street and tell those folks about Jesus. So perhaps God is calling you across the street, around the world, or to a church vocation. And I'm convinced that God is calling many of us. In fact, this week as I was working on this message and praying through, I wrote down a number on a little card and slipped it under the glass on my desk to begin praying and asking God for the number of people that I pray that God will call out of this church out of the next decade. You know, those to answer the call may be college students who are here during their time at LCU or LSUA, and God calls them to what He wants them to do. They may be people who watch online, and they are called to do something for the Lord. They may be people who grow up in this church and then are called out from this church to answer God's call. They may be adults who realize God is calling them to chart a different course in their life or an additional course in their life. And you might be wondering, what was that number, Pastor? It was 100. 100 people called out of this church in the next 10 years? That sounds ridiculous. That sounds unattainable. Yeah, I agree. But I decided we needed a God-sized goal. And I also realized the need is great. And I also realized that this church touches a lot of people. A lot of people in my 17 years of pastor have come through this church and are now serving elsewhere as they moved for some job and they moved away, or they came for college and they moved away. So what if God intentionally called some of those for a specific purpose and we celebrated that? Or what if there are people right here today who God is calling and you would answer? Why not 100? Well, why not let the 100 start with you? What is that in your hand? What has God given you? And what's He calling you to do? What's that in your hand? It may be just a staff, but God is with you.